What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. I'm super excited to make this one because I would say the running backs that we're going to go over today make up like 25% of the running back questions I get each week. The six we'll go over today are Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Cam Akers, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and J.K. Dobbins. All of them busted or like effectively busted last season, all due to injury, but we know that each one of them does have an elite ceiling and are all currently being drafted inside the top 30 running backs. We're not talking about backs that are going in like the 60s and 70s. All of these have, a relatively high opportunity cost, and so it's very important to understand, do we want them on our team? Do we think that they can have bounce back seasons, truly break out again? Or are they going to bust again this season, or at least underperform their current ADPs? I'll be going over my rankings for all of these backs today, but it's only six of them, right? So if you want to see my exact projection for every player, every scoring format, 3 wide receiver leagues, 2 flex leagues, normal standard leagues, all different formats, you can check that out at my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So with that, let's hop into this. And we'll start off by ADP, going with Christian McCaffrey. He goes anywhere from like 2nd to 6th overall on some platforms, but in competitive leagues, I have not seen him fall, at least recently, past like 2 or 3. He is going to be a top 3 pick for the vast majority of you. You should basically just be surprised if he falls to 4, 5, 6, slips to like 7 or something like that. He's probably going 1st, 2nd, or 3rd overall. And it's actually pretty wild what happened to McCaffrey these last 2 seasons. He was fully healthy in college. He didn't miss a game over his first 3 seasons in the NFL, even handling 326 touches and then 403 touches in years 2 and 3. So this wasn't like some scat back getting 100 touches each season. That's why he's healthy. He was getting a billion touches a week, and he was healthy year after year after year. And everything has gone wrong since then. He suffered a high ankle sprain in week 2 of 2020, missed 6 games, misses another 3 games with an AC joint sprain, another 4 with a thigh injury. We roll into last season, 5 games with a hamstring, 5 games missed with an ankle. Like, he has just fallen apart these last 2 years. And, he's only been able to play in 10 games last 2 seasons, and that isn't even 10 healthy games. He was on a very limited snap count in 4 of those 10 weeks. We have not seen more than like a handful of fully healthy games for Christian McCaffrey for years. But despite this, even looking back at, including basically, look at those 10 games, include the games where he wasn't fully healthy, he has still averaged 116 total yards, 5.4 receptions, 8 total touchdowns in those 10 games. Good for 19 fantasy points per game in half PPR scoring. And again, a good chunk of those games were on very limited touches, very limited snap share. Christian McCaffrey is the single most valuable player in all of fantasy football when he is healthy. And I think that's very important to remind ourselves of. No one knows if he's going to stay healthy this season, but he's not coming off a major injury like a torn ACL, a torn Achilles, like 2 of the backs we're going to talk about in a second. He did just turn 26 years old. And while he's had very, very unfortunate injury luck the last 2 seasons, he's proved that when he comes back from these injuries, he is still a stud. So, like we will talk about in a few seconds with Saquon Barkley, it's different with him. With Barkley, he comes back, he wasn't every single game going off. With McCaffrey, every single time he steps onto the field, when he's even remotely healthy, he has been scoring 20, 25, 30 fantasy points. It is just going to happen. He's going to remain involved. He's going to be phenomenal in fantasy. I would personally take Jonathan Taylor over him in most formats. That is honestly debated. Some people take him number 1 overall. I would still take Jonathan Taylor first. But I would not let McCaffrey slip past the number 2 pick. I would take even 12 healthy games for McCaffrey in a full season over like a fully healthy season for pretty much any other player. Like, name most other players. You told me they're playing a full 17 games. You told me McCaffrey's playing 12 healthy games. I would probably take McCaffrey's 12 healthy games over almost every single player. And if you just give me the possibility that McCaffrey could stay healthy, like he has still done in the majority of his seasons in his career, it's insane upside that I don't think you can pass up on. So for me, I think you're taking him at his ADP. I understand people who are scared. And if you want to pass on him for like the Cup or Justin Jeffersons of the world, I think it is okay. And I do not believe you're going to lose your league because you made that decision, especially in like a 3 wide receiver format where wide receiver is a little bit more valuable. But for the vast majority of you that play in, half PPR, full PPR leagues that don't have that, I would still take Christian McCaffrey second overall. Now on to Saquon, who, like I alluded to before, is a little bit different than McCaffrey. Slightly younger. He's not turning 26 until this coming February, so he's still 25 years old. Very, very young player. But like I alluded to, a little bit different in their stories. Both were monsters before the injuries, but Saquon hasn't shown that he can be his old self just yet. When McCaffrey's on the field, like I said, 20-25 fantasy points, it's a lock. But Saquon played in 13 games last season, and for many of them, he was not good. And obviously, he wasn't fully healthy in a lot of them, but he played at least 50% of the snaps in 10 of those games. And yet he had single-digit fantasy points in 4 of those games, going over 20 once. He didn't show the ceiling, and he showed a very, very scary floor because he wasn't as involved in the receiving game as we had been used to. And you could blame it on the offense, but McCaffrey was playing for the Panthers, right? They're not, the Packers or the Chiefs. So if you want to use the offense excuse, well, why was McCaffrey so good in all these games? At the end of the day, Saquon has averaged 3.5 yards per carry on his 181 carries over the last 2 years, on only 3.1 receptions added on to that. He has been unable to really even approach the success of his rookie season since that happened. I mean, he had a good year or two, but his rookie season is like significantly the best of his career. And there is a very real concern that he will simply never hit those numbers ever again. So would I draft him? He is currently the 14th running back off the board on average with a composite ADP of 24. So he's basically going at the turn of the second and the third round in a 12-team league. He goes the earliest on Underdog, being taken 17th overall, latest on ESPN going 29th overall. I'll just say right off the bat, 29th, I mean, if you're getting him in the mid-third round, I think that is unbelievable value, especially because ESPN's like standard format is full PPR. So in a full PPR format on ESPN, he is going 29th overall. That's, again, the mid-third round, so you've probably gotten... Maybe you got like a top 5 player, you got a Jefferson or Jamar Chase, but you got a really, really good player in round 1. A very solid player in round 2. It's a luxury pick at that point, taking Saquon Barkley, so absolutely there. And honestly, I think that his ADP being at that turn is a really good spot for me for 2 reasons. One, I do believe in this offense. I do believe in this coaching staff. And while I don't believe they're going to be an elite offense, I think they're going to be significantly better than they were last season. And I believe that they're going to throw the ball a lot more, lead to more receptions, a much higher floor for Saquon. So I believe that they're going to be better, and that's going to help him. But second, I just think, like I alluded to before, like it's that luxury pick. When you're taking him at the turn, well, that means if it's a turn, you got like McCaffrey or Jonathan Taylor on your team. And so that's just like a rock solid start. And then you're also pairing him with likely, I would say, another wide receiver. Maybe you get like Debo or Mike Evans, like a really, really solid wide receiver 1. At this point, you're locked in with 2 fantastic players. My thing is, like, why not take the shot on Saquon? I understand that we could see Saquon from last season and he could just be dust. He could just be bad. But he's 25 years old. He's now a little bit more removed from these major injuries. And if he can stay healthy, no one's going to be shocked if he ends up as, honestly, the number 1 running back. Nobody would be shocked if that ended up happening. Am I guessing that's going to happen? No. But I have him ranked 17th. And while I would prefer not to take him there, obviously, you always want to draft players behind where the rankings are. Like, it'd just be unfortunate if you're picking at 17 and literally the first 16 players in the rankings are all taken. You're like, no value at this pick. But I really, really like him at that turn because it just feels like a luxury pick, an easy pick to make when you consider even if he were to bust, is it really going to hurt your team that much? I mean, if you still have like Jonathan Taylor, you still have Deebo Samuel, they're going off. If you lose Saquon, you can make up for that. So take a shot, because if he hits and you've got like Jonathan Taylor and then Saquon posting 25 a game to go along with like a Mike Evans or a Deebo Samuel or someone like that, you're probably going to make the playoffs. And if you can make moves that, if they work out, just like instantly catapult you into the playoffs already in like rounds 2 and 3, I think you got to do it. Now, I don't love him in like the early second and mid-second round, because then you're not pairing him with one of the top 5 players we like. He is your second round pick. And so then when you get to the third round, you have like a later third round pick, and it's just not as good for me. So I would say if you get a top 5 pick in the draft and Saquon is there at that 2-3 turn for you, I would take a shot on him. I think it's worth it at that point. Third on our list is Ezekiel Elliott, and I have mixed feelings on this one. I actually do think that Zeke is going to get a ton of work this season, has insane touchdown upside, especially for where he's going in drafts. But I checked my exposures in Underdog because I'm making this video and I'm like, I feel like I have him projected pretty well, relatively close to his ADP on most sites, but I feel like I don't draft him. And so I go on Underdog and I see I have him on 6% of my teams, which is crazy when you consider that, like, again, I have him projected around ADP, and I am, as you guys know, team running back early. So you would think that just naturally I would have pretty high exposure to a lot of the early running backs, because I love taking running backs early. Looking at ADPs, he's the worst value on NFL and Sleeper, going 29th overall on both those. That's, a little bit aggressive. That's like the mid-third round. That's probably a little bit too early. And he's actually the best value in Underdog, going 39th overall over there. And so if he's the best value in Underdog, and I rarely get him over there, then I suppose I have to recommend fading him. And maybe this is just some sort of bias on my end, like some sort of bias I have against Zeke, because I love Pollard so much. It's pretty clear. I talk about all the time how much Zeke has taken a step back, how his numbers every single season have slowly gotten worse and worse and worse. And while you can attribute some of that last season to the injury, and I think that's deserved, like some of it should go to the injury, the fact remains every season he's looking worse. He's looking slower. They can talk about how his speed is like really good in camp. Like every year he's getting slower. He just doesn't look that great. And Pollard looks good. And so maybe this is some sort of bias on my end that I'm like, why are they not using Pollard? I'm moving down the rankings. But with that being said, I want to reiterate that Dallas loves Ezekiel Elliott. They're paying him a ton of money, and they've come out and said, he's our lead back. He's getting the touches. And I completely trust that they are being truthful when they say that. They're going to force feed him the ball, even if he's the second best running back on the team, because that's what they do. So understand, this is not me saying he's not going to get touches. He's going to get a ton of touches. But I can't recommend you draft someone that I haven't personally been drafting myself, especially when that person has performed worse, like I said, every year of their career, and plays with a backup that has been outplaying them in multiple seasons. And one kind of final note on Zeke, sometimes you can look at his end of season numbers, because he does play through injury a lot, he doesn't miss a lot of time, and be like, oh wow, he's been consistent every year. But look at the per game numbers as well, because sometimes, and I'm sure if you had Zeke last season, you agree with this take, sometimes we look at these end of season numbers on a player who played, 16, 17 games, and they look really good, but you'd prefer having someone play like 13 games, but when they're playing, they're performing much better, as opposed to Zeke, who's going out there every single week and being fine, like always getting you some points, but not truly having a great ceiling, and just spreading out like average production over a significant number of games because he's not really missing any time. So while the numbers look good overall, per game, it's not like super valuable. And I think you can see that in like playoff rates and things like that, where he wasn't like overly valuable to have in these last few seasons. Next on the list, we have Cam Akers, who we'll probably spend the least amount of time on, because I did like a really in-depth breakdown on him, comparing him with Travis Etienne, and I don't even remember who the third running back was, but 2 weeks ago on the Thursday video, we talked in depth about Akers, and you guys know that I like him, and my view hasn't changed since that video. So check that video out if you want a much longer take. I can link it in the description if I remember as well. But in short, he returned way ahead of schedule last season from the torn Achilles, which should give us confidence, like all the confidence in the world really, that he is 100% right now. And yet people are avoiding him because of his performance when he returned, while comparing him to, basically people's take is no one's returned from this injury, even though we did see Foreman last season look better than he ever had before the injury. But basically the take is like no one's ever returned from this injury. But look at the sample of people who have suffered the injury. It's scrubs, and I think Arian Foster might be the best running back on the list, but like he was like 30 when he did it. Like, it's scrubs. It's absolute scrubs. It's people who weren't even good before the injury, so they're not going to all of a sudden be good after the injury. And it's a list of like 10 to 12 players. I don't see how we can justify judging a player on a sample size of like 10 scrubs. So he came back before James Robinson even tore his Achilles, and people are starting to jump on board with Robinson, being like, oh, he looks good in camp. Oh, let's draft him late. He's a really good running back, without just like fully understanding how much time Cam Akers has had to return from this injury. And I understand people being like, well, it's worth a late shot on Robinson. Absolutely. I agree. I agree with those people. But don't use the injury as a reason why someone can't be good while saying, oh, let's take him late because maybe he'll be good, especially when the timelines are so much different. Again, I just want to make sure everyone understands this. Cam Akers returned last season well ahead of time in his recovery from this torn Achilles injury. He returned before James Robinson even tore his Achilles. And now we see James Robinson in camp, probably soon going to be joining the team in team drills. Akers may have looked bad when he returned, but how do you think Robinson would have looked if you put him into a game in like May? He'd average like 1 yard per carry, and he wouldn't have been in a game because he wasn't cleared. Akers has had plenty of time to recover, and I do believe he's going to look good this season, much better than last year. I believe the organization still loves him. And remember, he's 23. He's not some 27-year-old running back. When people are this young, it's much more likely they can recover from these injuries. Next up, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde's ADP has tanked this season from previous years, now being taken in the early 6th round, even after Darrell Williams has left the team. But I actually have that as like a pretty appropriate spot for him, and I really wouldn't be overly excited to draft him in that spot. The 6th round is an elite spot to draft quarterback, an elite spot to draft wide receivers, and so there's a massive opportunity cost in drafting Clyde there. And when I think about how confident I am that he's going to have a bounce back this season, I really don't have all that much confidence. Like I said, I mean, he's the lead back on Kansas City now that Darrell Williams is gone, but they do end up having, McKinnon on the team, and so could he have a role on passing downs? They have now Ronald Jones. Could he take some early down snaps? Pacheco, however you say his last name, he has been getting a decent amount of hype. He's a very late round rookie, but he's been getting some hype. Some people really do like his talent. Does he make the team? Does he potentially steal some work as well? Like, there are question marks here. And for me to gain confidence in taking Clyde there, again, ahead of the phenomenal wide receivers and quarterbacks in that range, I need to hear in camp that he's the guy, that he's going to get some goal line, and that he's going to get some like passing downs. And if I end up hearing that, it's like, okay, everyone else has heard that. So now for me to gain confidence at a 6th round ADP, I need to hear news that'll bump his ADP up to like the 4th or 5th round. And so it basically creates a situation where I'm just not going to get him, because for me to feel confident this ADP, I'll need news that'll push his ADP way higher to a point where I'm still not going to be comfortable. Because if he was going in the 4th or 5th round, now there's really, really good players that we could be taking, a very high opportunity cost, and I just can't see myself doing that. So it's a no at his current ADP until we get news that'll push his ADP higher, in which case I will still probably say no. The final player we'll go over today, J.K. Dobbins. As of recording this, he has not returned to practice yet, but he is close. In fact, he's closer to returning than Gus Edwards is, which is the opposite news that we heard earlier in the summer. Earlier, like a few months ago, we were being told that Gus looks like he's ahead in the recovery. Maybe Gus, starts the season healthy and Dobbins doesn't. Now it's the reverse of that happening. It seems like Dobbins is going to return very, very soon. that Gus is a little bit behind in the recovery, and maybe we could see a season start where Dobbins is on the field and Gus isn't. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. It'll be interesting to see, like, okay, Dobbins has returned to practice, but will he play in the preseason? Will he be in like a 50% snap share in week 1? Like, we just don't know at this point. Currently, he's coming off the board, 4th, 5th round turn, kind of in that range, but he does go in the 4th round on ESPN, NFL.com, and Sleeper. And that is too early for me. I love him as a player. I always will, because he carried my team into the playoffs late in his rookie year. But that's an aggressive price tag for a non-pass catching running back on an offense that doesn't use a featured back, with a highly mobile quarterback, and a player who's coming off a torn ACL. Like, at the end of the day, people recover much better now than they used to with torn ACLs, with major injuries, but there is still a level of unknown that we have with his talent. I don't think it's really a question that he's going to play this season, but how good will he be? Because he's won in fantasy off incredible efficiency, and that's made up for the lack of a passing game role, which we know is going to remain the same this season. I just think people are being very optimistic, and when I look at my projections for him, I have him with 5 yards per carry. I have him as the lead back on this team, with the most targets among running backs, with 11 total touchdowns. Like, I'm not projecting him for like 4 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns, right? I'm projecting him for a really good role on a really run-heavy and really good offense. That's a really good projection. And if that grades out as overpriced at like the 4th and the 5th round turn, then that's not great, especially because we can add on the risk that, well, what if he isn't highly efficient? What if he doesn't average 5 yards per carry? What if Lamar happens to have a spike season for rushing touchdowns and maybe Dobbins only scores 7 times? What if coming off of this injury, he's a little bit less explosive? Maybe they want to be a little bit more careful with him, and he isn't clearly the lead back. Like, there's just so many things that could happen to where it's like 4th, 5th round. Again, my projections are very fair, and they're saying that's overpriced. In my eyes, that's a fade. And the final point there is, like, what happens if I'm wrong? That's something I go back to a lot, is, does this player have a chance to just bury me? Like, if I'm wrong on this projection and he goes off, could I just lose the league because of that? And I don't see how the answer to that could possibly be yes. He would need like 15, 16 rushing touchdowns, over 5 yards per carry to truly bury you for not taking him in the 4th or 5th round. And there are just players going around him that are also going to be fantastic. And if he's never going to see those receptions, he needs to be highly efficient coming off his torn ACL, get really lucky with touchdowns. And that just gives me all the confidence in the world to say, no, I'm going to fade him as current ADP. And honestly, if anything, his ADP is going up. Because if he returns to camp and Gus Edwards doesn't, every day that that's the case, people are going to take him a little earlier and a little earlier. And you could see a world where he's easily going in the 4th round in every league. And again, it's too early in my eyes. So that's my take on 6 potential bounce back running backs. Again, I'm in on McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, and Cam Akers having a bounce back season. I am out on Zeke, Clyde, and Dobbins. You can see my exact projections for every single player by looking at my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, and especially do so if you're in a non-standard league format. So maybe 3 wide receivers being starting. Maybe you have multiple flex spots. You really want to be using my rankings if that's the case, because I account for the change in positional value under those leagues. And so you're going to have a huge edge by using my rankings, since it's very likely your league mates are not accounting for that. If anyone in your league is like showing up with a magazine, they're not accounting for the change for like a 3 wide receiver league. If they're printing off rankings from most of the other websites in the industry, they are probably not accounting for the difference in positional value that comes with changing to 3 wide receivers and 2 flex spots. And so you're going to gain a huge edge by using my rankings. So I will be back tomorrow to break down some mid-round quarterbacks, Friday to go over the ETR and FFA must draft list, and then Saturday to go over the latest news and ADP changes around the industry. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? But thanks for watching.